Conclusions are tough, but we can think of them in two pretty streamlined ways here. The first would be cumulative. This is probably what you're used to hearing about conclusions that you might have been taught in previous English classes. Um, and this would kind of open up with a definitive statement on the author or text, some of the main takeaways, or maybe just one main takeaway. And then the greatest hits, right? Overview of main ideas and how they accumulate in a better understanding of the text. So hitting your main points that you've talked about throughout the essay. And then as the old adage goes, opening a window or final thoughts, where do we go from here? So as they say, a conclusion, we'll close the door and open a window. So bring your thesis statement or main idea about the text to a close, but open that room for further thought, further conversation surrounding the text. So that's kind of the standard way. And then you can also think about this as an evidence-based conclusion. So it looks similar, but this time we're introducing one more piece of information or one more piece of textual evidence. So it would start the same, definitive statement on text or author, and then overview and one final piece of evidence from text that you feel encapsulates your main ideas just really perfectly. And then still opening that window for final thoughts or asking where do we go from here? How do we keep the ball rolling on these ideas? Some templates for how this would look on this cumulative conclusion. So you could say author makes major contribution to literature in some way. So not exactly saying that, but author does this major thing in this book throughout, put the title there and then burrow in a little further. In particular, he, she, they, whatever your specific focus is in that particular text that you wrote about in your essay. And in doing so, he, she, or they overview of those main points. So the greatest hits, so to speak, synthesize down your main points into like a list in that sentence. And then final statement on why this matters, why we should maybe keep thinking of it as we move along here, opening that window for further thought. Of course, the evidence-based conclusion template looks very similar. Author makes some major contribution to literature in some way throughout title of this book by overview of those main points. And then the difference here is that you would say something like, this is evident when, and bring in this one last quote that's just so, dynamite and so bringing together all these ideas and leave your audience with that. Of course, you don't want to close with the quote. You would go on to still make a statement on why this matters, but offering this one last piece of evidence to keep things fresh. I've heard from students many, many times over the years that conclusions just feel like rehashing the things they've been saying throughout the essay, and they already feel like they've said these things so many times. So I always say, try to nudge students towards this. If you're feeling that way, you can bring in another quote or another new thing to talk about, as long as it's kind of bringing things to a close or is encapsulating these main ideas in such a way. So let's see this in action. If we're talking about the cumulative conclusion, and this, for example, is about Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. If you haven't read it, we're not interested in the book itself. We're just interested in the form of the conclusion here. So Ralph Ellison constantly toys with form throughout Invisible Man. That's that major contribution. In particular, he dismantles the conventional concept of character by denying his audience access to his protagonist's name. In doing so, he closes the distance between reader and character, troubles the distinction between fiction and social reality, and puts forth profound questions about identity in America. So this would be that overview. You can think maybe in this hypothetical essay, each of these things were a body paragraph. Closing the distance between reader and character, troubling distinction between fiction and social reality, and putting forth profound questions about American identity. Maybe those were each talked about in the 3 body paragraphs that preceded this conclusion. And here they're just kind of strung along in a briefer format. So that's hitting those main ideas and then opening this window. Contemporary authors and audiences alike should take note of Ellison's persistent formal tinkering, because an increasingly fractured media landscape, form and meaning are often one. So this is not saying this is the final word. It's saying we can take these ideas, we can take this text and move forward as we think about our own social realities and media landscapes. So the definitive statement, the overview, and the open window. Now, if we were going to do this by bringing in another piece of textual evidence, so this evidence-based conclusion, it might look something like this. Ralph Ellison constantly toys with form throughout Invisible Man. Same exact definitive statement from the first one, and then we'll see it vary a little bit here. By denying his audience access to his protagonist's name, he's able to close the distance between reader and character, trouble the distinction between fiction and social reality, and put forth profound questions about identity in America. As the nameless central character asks in the final line of the novel, comma, quote, "Who knows but that on the lower frequencies I speak for you," end quote. So the first part of this will look a lot like the previous one, where you're giving an overview of those points, but then you are bringing in a new quote. And in this case, this is in fact the very last line of the novel, but it is bringing together all the ideas we've talked about and still putting forth a new piece of evidence. And then a slightly different open window, so to speak. Contemporary authors and audiences alike would do well to really listen to the characters in today's novels, because they may be speaking on behalf of the voiceless, so tying back in to that quote that we've brought in. Now, of course, there are other ways to do conclusions, but to streamline it a bit, you can think of it in these two similar but slightly different